The Grateful Dead was the epitome of jam bands and counterculture. Through their diehard fans, passion for the music, and their unorthodox performance style, they've played a major role in pop music. Our group is hoping to effectively chronicle a group with one of the most loyal fan bases in history. We have put a dramatic emphasis on Jerry Garcia, however, because we believe in order to fully appreciate the Grateful Dead, you need to understand who he was. Garcia, the founding and heart and soul of the Grateful Dead, was born in San Francisco to Jose and Ruth Garcia. Jerry had a difficult childhood. In 1947, he went through two pretty traumatic events that shaped him for the rest of his life. He had most of his right middle finger cut off by his brother in a wood-cutting accident. But later that year, in a much more traumatic event, he lost his father while he was fly fishing. In the early 50s, Jerry and his brother Tiff moved in with their maternal grandparents. This is where Jerry, early on as a child, had his artistic ability fostered by his teacher. At the same time, he picked up the 5-string banjo, which really started a lifelong relationship with music. For Jerry's 15th birthday, he got an accordion, which really disappointed him. It disappointed him so much, he exchanged it for electric guitar and amp. For the first time, Jerry finally owned his own guitar. In 1960, a 17-year-old Jerry Garcia drops out of high school and joins the Army. He eventually completed basic training. However, 8 months after joining, he is kicked out for lack of a military lifestyle. On February 20th, 1961, Jerry survived a potentially fatal car accident. This moment was important to Jerry because it made him realize that in order to succeed as a musician, he would have to put aside his aspirations for the visual arts. 1962 was a crucial year for the Grateful Dead, as it was the year in which Jerry met the rest of the band members. Jerry met Ron Pigpen McCorman, the pianist, while he was on his coffee house tours. Jerry met Bill Kurtzman, the drummer, and Bob Weir, the future guitarist, at Dana Morgan's music store. And finally, Jerry met Phil Lesh at a party in Menlo Park. 1964 saw Jerry Pigpen and Bob Weir jam together for a whole summer as the folk band Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions. Jerry Pigpen and Bob all had a huge interest in folk music, and this band really shows where the Grateful Dead's bluegrass influence comes from. In 1965 in Menlo Park, Jerry Pigpen, Bob, Phil, and Bill jammed for the first together at their premiere gig at Magoo's Pizza as the Warlocks. Interestingly enough, the Grateful Dead couldn't keep this name, because at the same time all the way on the East Coast, the Velvet Underground had the same name. Later in 1965, the Grateful Dead performed their first official gig as the house band at one of Ken Kesey's infamous acid tests. It is important to note, however, that Ken Kesey's acid tests were instrumental in shaping the Grateful Dead as a jam band. Let's just say that Ken Kesey and his party attendees were too distracted to focus on the music, giving the Grateful Dead full creative license and allowing them to improv. In 1966, the Grateful Dead moved into a house at the center of the counterculture world, Haight-Ashbury. The house became a local fixture in the music scene, and they began to perform dozens of free concerts, which later on heavily influenced their enormous following. In 1969, Jerry is featured on the cover of the Rolling Stone magazine for the first time. Later that year, the Grateful Dead performed at Woodstock on August 15th. In 1970, the Grateful Dead released what I personally feel, along with the Rolling Stone, was their best album, American Beauty. To me, it just sounds like pure Americana. On April 29th, 1971, the Grateful Dead performed the last show at Manhattan's Fillmore East. In 1971, Pigpen also took a break from touring in August due to health reasons. On March 8th, in 1973, Ron Pigpen McCorman dies of complications due to Crohn's disease. It's important to note, however, that the complications were especially exaggerated due to his heavy drinking. In 1974, audio engineer Owsley Stanley debuts the Wall of Sound, a super powerful PA system designed exclusively for the Grateful Dead. Stanley's Wall of Sound, however, is much different than that of Phil Spector's. Stanley's includes a giant wall of speakers designed to just blast music at a crowd, where Spector is talking about musical layering. In 1977, the Grateful Dead switched their record label to Arista Records, and they soon debuted their first album with them, Terrapin Station. The late 70s and early 80s for the Grateful Dead were really characterized by a lot of touring, including a 3-night stint at the Pyramids in Giza, a performance on Saturday Night Live on November 11th, 1978, shows in San Francisco and New York. So at this point, the Grateful Dead had a huge underground following, willing to go with the band anywhere.
For the peace of this resting site for Pharaoh's long dead was shattered by the Grateful Dead. If this wasn't the first new music to be heard here in the world's oldest civilization, it was surely the loudest. The desert shook from the shockwaves of 3 electric guitars, an electric piano, and the ceaseless beat of the drums. 20 tons of electronic gear the Dead brought here for 3 electric concerts, fundraisers for handicapped children and the Antiquities Museum in Cairo. 20 tons worth to dance to, most dancers being not Egyptians but Americans, some 250 of them from the fan club The Deadheads, who flew all this way figuring it would be a terrific trip.
The band continues to tour smoothly up until July 10th, 1986, when Jerry Garcia falls severely ill and falls into a 5-day diabetic coma, of which he nearly dies. After coming out of the coma, he needs to reteach himself how to play the guitar, and only up until December 15th, the Grateful Dead returned to performing. In 1987, the Grateful Dead released their first and only top 40 hit, Touch of Grey, which peaks on the chart at number 9. Later that year, on July 10th, the Grateful Dead began a tour with Bob Dylan. In 1992, Jerry Garcia experiences yet another health scare. He falls ill, and doctors indicating that his unhealthy lifestyle of chili dogs and milkshakes, in addition to heavy smoking, has finally caught up to him. In 1994, the Grateful Dead are inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a testament to their years of touring and beloved fans.
Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead guitarist who kept the counterculture of the 1960s rocking and rolling right into the 90s, died today in California.
On August 9th, 1995, Jerry Garcia dies of natural causes at a drug rehabilitation center. Only a month earlier, he had played his final show in Chicago, yet this moment marked the end of the Grateful Dead, but more importantly, the end of an era. Admittingly, Jerry lived a surprisingly long life. 53 isn't bad for a man whose weight would occasionally get up to 300 pounds. But also, with his long history of drug abuse, it's shocking that he made it that long. Although the Grateful Dead disintegrated in 1995 with the death of Jerry Garcia, many members continue to actively tour across the U.S. today. Phil and Friends, for example, has become a staple amongst jam bands since their formation in 1999, and I personally have friends who have seen them. The Grateful Dead's musical style can really be characterized by their simple lyrics and pleasant harmonies. With 5 instruments, a bass guitar, rhythm guitar, lead guitar, piano, and drums, the Grateful Dead had a variety of sounds that they could produce. All the members of the band sung in harmony, much like the Beatles. But unlike the Beatles, their focus was on improv and jamming, so there are a lot of long solos and funky beats and absences of lyrics. Their sounds always exhibit the heavy blues, country, and folk influence that Jerry Garcia was fond of when he was growing up.